Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am presenting on redefining and analyzing active versus passive recreational opportunities for children ages 0 to 4 in Eastern Pima County. And I am Jessica Abrahams. So I will be walking you through an introduction where I will talk about the obesity rates in children ages 0 to 4. And then I will be comparing the San Francisco Rose, which is the recreation and open space element, and the Tucson Star. And then I will walk you through the Lucis methods and building the suitability model, and then the results and conclusions. So first, there is an approximately 17% overweight and obesity figure in children ages 0 to 14. And therefore more recreational opportunities are needed. And this is a picture of some of the recreational opportunities featured in Pima County, such as Limberlost Park, Tucson Mall, and Park Place Mall. So how is accessibility to recreational opportunities currently assessed? Most of the time people use a half-mile standard. And in this case, the San Francisco Rose use the quarter-mile standard and for playgrounds, as opposed to half-mile standard for sports fields, parks with trails, and parks with picnic areas or gardens. And as any parent of a 0 to 4-year-old knows, including myself, it is pretty darn difficult to get your small child to walk a half-mile to a playground. They will probably ask you to pick them up at some point, and when you've got 2 of them, that's even more difficult. Thank goodness for husbands. So we have the San Francisco Rose breakdown, where we have active versus passive recreation, where active recreation is playgrounds and sports fields, and passive is walking trails, picnic areas, and gardens, as opposed to the Tucson Star, where we've got a walkability standard of a half-mile across the board, and there is no differentiation between active and passive recreation. Simply put, it's a park. Okay, so our purpose is to build a 7-point suitability model using a weighted sum overlay method known as Lucis. And weighted sum basically means you are taking a grid, you are breaking it down into cells of equal size, and you are overlaying them together to get a final result. And in this case, we are taking slope, land use zones, soil, population ages 0 to 4 by standard deviation, and by census block group, median household income by census tract and standard deviation, distance to playgrounds, and distance to major roads. And we're going to overlay these 7 layers together into a final multiple utility analysis for suitability for development of new playgrounds. And Lucis itself is a weighting system where it weights from 0 to 9, with 0 being low and 9 being high. So walking you through the steps, first the decision maker has to make decisions as to what's important. And then you have to have a grid of equally sized cells. And more often than not, you're going to use a feature to raster conversion to achieve that. And then the ranking, all cells need to be weighted in preference from 0 to 9, 0 being low and 9 being high. And then we have a weighted sum, which is an overlay of all the single utility analyses into a multiple utility analysis. So we have 7 sub-goals, which I pointed out to you in a previous slide. The first one is to assess accessibility. Sorry, backtracking a little bit. We have 7 sub-goals, and then we have multiple utility analyses. And the goal for the multiple utility analysis is first to assess suitability for new playground development for children ages 0 to 4 in Eastern Pima County, and then to match up the vacant parcels in Eastern Pima County with our suitability analysis map. So a sample of methods used. In this case, we are using a census block group's raster of population of children ages 0 to 4. We are converting it from a feature to a raster to get a raster grid. Then we're going to reclassify it according to the population ages 0 to 4, and by standard deviation to have our single utility analysis of population. And here are our results. We have a red to green map symbolized by standard deviation, with green being standard deviations above the norm in terms of population, and red being populations that are below standard deviation, such as retirement areas like Catalina up here, and the area in northeastern Pima County that's unincorporated. This area, which is the Las Ciénegas National Reserve area, and then here is Green Valley. And those are either known to be retirement areas or known to be preserves, so not much population of children ages 0 to 4, and then higher populations of children 0 to 4 in northeastern Marana, which isn't very surprising. That's a family area that's currently being developed by a bunch of tract house builders, master plan development communities, and eastern Tucson here, and that's getting towards Drexel Heights, so higher populations of kids, and also a section of Sahuarita as well. And then the yellow is normal population. So next we have slopes. In the case of this study, federal lands were completely removed from the analysis in various methods. I either erased them or I simply deleted them in the case of the Davis-Monthan Air Force Base here. So they're completely removed from the study, and a lot of those federal lands had higher slopes. So this is a 15% less slope for most of eastern Pima County, and this reclassification was done based on the Tucson Hillside Development Zone Ordinance, where basically anything that is greater than about 15% has some limitations, anything that is below 15% basically doesn't, and anything greater than 33% has very severe limitations. So, moving on. Here is our third sub-goal, which is to identify areas in eastern Pima County according to median household income. And this was done also according to standard deviation, with higher income areas being of less priority and lower incomes areas being of more priority because of lack of access to a car in the case of a lot of homes with lower incomes. So here we have some of the lower income areas in southwestern Pima County, kind of the unincorporated area. Then we have some higher income areas such as the Catalina foothills, no surprise there. And then up in portions of Oro Valley, so those were of less priority. And then Tucson itself has got areas of lower income and areas of standard income. And then as you get towards Tonque Verde out here, it's got one of the higher income areas. So you have basically a priority for lower income, lower median household income areas. And then identifying soil suitability. A lot of this resulted in more or less you don't want to build in the wash. But to go back a little bit, what was done here was that all the soils were taken from the U.S. Department of Agriculture or U.S. Geological Survey data. Then they were reclassified according to their suitability for new playground development. And this resulted in scores of no data for the areas where there was absolutely no data. Unfortunately, there are some areas for which there simply isn't any. So what I did to account for those was I reclassified them as 0. They were originally rated as null data because these needed to be included in the analysis for the weighted sum. And then the least suited areas, which are predominantly the washes. And then medium suitability, certain soils in Pima County. And then the best suited soils, we particularly have this lovely area often referred to as, let's see, there's the northwest area. And then we also have sections of Tucson that are highly suitable as well, mainly in the north and portions of the west where it's a little bit east of the wash. And then we have other sections where there's just simply no data. So with Green Valley, it's Harder and Sarita as well. There's simply no data that exists in the database as of yet. So then looking at distance to major roads, the reality is that some of the time parents are going to drive their kids to a park rather than choose to make them walk. So this was done according to commuter distances, where approximately 3 to 10 miles is a drivable commuter distance. Most people will walk anywhere from a half mile, quarter mile to 3 miles. It depends on who you're talking to and what city you're in. 3 to 10 miles is fair commuter distance, maximum of about a half an hour drive. And then anything over 10 miles is quite a drive. So people probably won't bother doing that drive to go searching for a new playground, or for an old playground for that matter. So most areas in eastern Pima County are within about 3 miles of a major road. Some parts are more like 3 to 10 miles, although this particular portion is the natural preserve. This area, we're getting towards getting about a little bit west of the mines. Then there are some areas such as west of the Ironwood Monument that are pretty darn far from any major road whatsoever. And then land use zones. The goal of this particular single utility analysis was to put playgrounds in residential areas, because that's more often than not what a city planner will do. So residential areas were weighted the highest, and then industrial areas were weighted amongst the lowest, and then floodplains. Yeah, you definitely want to keep a playground out of a floodplain if at all possible, or a preserve. So what this showed is, like, here we've got the natural preserve, Las Ciénegas. This is a floodplain, and then little areas that are floodplains. And then we have a very residential eastern Pima County. So for the most part, that was fine. And then you have some industrial zones, such as, this is getting pretty close to Raytheon here. And then you have the freeway that seems to be running along right there. And then distance to playgrounds in eastern Pima County. The goal of this entire study was to encourage playgrounds within a quarter mile of an area. So the playgrounds that were already within, the areas that were already within a quarter mile or less of a playground were given lower priority, with the goal of putting playgrounds where there is limited access to playgrounds at present. So this resulted in areas such as the southwestern section being weighted amongst the highest priority, and this area as well, at least for this particular analysis, although for other analyses this is not going to be a particularly high area for priority. So going back over weighted sum, the end result was that all 7 single utility analysis layers were paired together into a multiple utility analysis. And this resulted in scores ranging with a possibility of 0 to 63. It actually resulted in scores with 18 being low and 58 being high. And some of the highest priority areas ended up being northeastern Marana, good area for playground development at present, since there are a lot of family homes being built in this area. Then we have sections of southwestern Pima County. This area, not so much. This is known to be a retirement area in the northeast area. That's the Las Ciénegas Natural Reserve, so not a good area to put a playground. And Sarita is of medium suitability. A lot of development out there. And when it comes to Tucson, it sort of varied a bit, and so forth. So, and then some of the lowest areas were in the washes, like this wash right over here, other wash areas. And that was what resulted for the suitability map. And then when this was paired with the vacant parcels, there are a few smaller vacant parcels in the northern and western sections of Tucson. But then there's this particularly nice parcel directly east of Davis-Monthan, and this was in an area of one of the higher suitability areas. So, in conclusion, this analysis successfully produced a suitability map for new playground development in the eastern Pima County area, according to the 7-point study model. And overlaying a shapefile of vacant parcels shows, it can help guide the placement of new playgrounds, and it also shows whether these parcels are located in areas that are highly suitable or less suitable, and whether they would be suitable for new playground development. And then we have some of our least suitable areas, such as unincorporated Pima County near the Coronado Forest. And then some of the most suitable, I mean, northeastern Rana pretty much is one of the highest areas in the study. So are there any questions?